Anything big happened yesterday?
Oh, happy day. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of these times, rarely on this show, where I just say, listen, you're going to have to indulge me for 10 minutes. The last time this happened was when my father passed away, and I'm like, look, I know you didn't tune in for this, but it's literally the least I can do. Well, this morning, in a far different realm, a segment 24 years in the making. In the words of Jim Lampley, when George Foreman knocked out Michael Moore after coming back from the wilderness, it happened. It happened. Daniel Snyder appears to be on his way to selling the Washington football team. And for a generation, and maybe even beyond a generation of Washingtonians and those who have grown up in D.C., Maryland, Virginia, I cannot express to you what a moment this is in time. Daniel Snyder reportedly selling the Washington football team, selling the franchise to Josh Harris, a group led by Josh Harris. He owns the Sixers, for $6.05 billion. That far exceeds the Broncos franchise tag when they sold to the Walmart heir Rob Walton for $4.65 billion. Daniel Snyder purchased the Washington franchise, and hell ensued in May of 1999 for $800 million. So think about that, $800 million in 1999. Here we are 24 years later. He gets to sell it for $6.05 billion, which I'll document momentarily why I say he gets to sell it. Deal for the Commanders likely won't be approved until league meetings scheduled for May 22nd through the 24th in Minneapolis. Let me just say this again for those who are new. I grew up in D.C., and let me just say this. It's not a sports town, right? In the way that Philly and Boston and Chicago and New York are sports towns. Those are real true blue American sports towns. Washington, D.C. was a Redskins town. It was a Skins town back in the day. There's a generation of us who grew up on the Bullets, not the Wizards. You think it's just a name change. No, we don't identify. We grew up on the Orioles, not the Nationals. We grew up as a generation of Washingtonians that didn't have a baseball team. Too young to know the Senators, too old to know the Nationals. And the Caps were a wonderful diversion from all the mishugas that ensued with the Washington football team all these years. But the Caps, in many ways, when they won the Stanley Cup in 2018, it was a 44-year journey from the abyss whose storybook really came to a close, to be quite honest with you. I think if you give truth serum to Washington Capitals fans, if you told them you're not going to win another Stanley Cup for 20 years, be like, hey, we got our one. We got there. But this was a franchise that captured all of our minds and all of our attentions. And, while most American sports fans wax a lot about how, have been here for generations, wax about how their dad took them to baseball games, the national pastime, and that's how they bonded with their fathers. For me, it was my immigrant father and the Skins. It's a Skins town. And let's just start with Daniel Snyder took what was most beloved, the most beloved thing to so many of us, kidnapped it from us and forced us to watch horrible things done to this franchise for a generation. We thought this was a life sentence. And so that's why yesterday, Republican, Democrat, Independent, it's the only thing that everybody from that area of the country can agree on. This man had to go. And finally, he did so many awful things that even he couldn't hold on to the franchise. Just talk about the football thing. The football on the field stuff is almost incidental. First of all, he gets the team and he starts firing people immediately, people who have been there for years, employees. He inherited a team that had a season ticket waiting list of decades moving forward. Turned it into a team that had a season ticket waiting list of 0, where the crowd was overrun by opponents' fan bases. But from the football side of things, again, it's almost incidental. Deion Sanders, Bruce Smith, you remember it. He treated like a fantasy football team. Let me just go through some of the other horrific names under his ownership and that of his stooge, Vinny Serrato, for so many years. Mark Carrier, all these guys overpaid grossly. Jeremiah Trotter, Adam Archuleta, Trunk candidate, Jesse Armstead, Antoine Randall, all guys that were way past their primes. Gave them multi-year deals. Again, a fantasy football team. I had no idea what they were doing. Then he sues season ticket holders during the recession in 2008, 2009, because they were unable to sort of fulfill their commitments. Season ticket holders from the 60s. Total football damage. Just 6 of the 24 seasons did Washington reach the playoffs. Only 2 playoff wins in that span. 164, 220, and 2. But again, that was just the on-the-field stuff. He banned all signs at FedEx Field because he was worried that people would have signs against him for all of his horrible off-the-field stuff. He was right, but he banned them. He's a dictator. Then he sold expired peanuts, Kelly, at one point, that came from a bankrupt airline. Don't forget about that. All of the radio stations in D.C. were derisively called Dan Jazeera because all they were his, just pulpit arms. But here's what, and then those kind of almost, I don't want to call them meaningless crimes, but compared to what came later, they do in the scheme of things. Toxic, predatory culture. Accused directly, by the way, of facilitating that culture. Accused of sexual assault himself. Accused of harassing and intimidating witnesses and reporters. Because the NFL wouldn't reveal the results of those investigations, Congress had to step in with federal investigations of a football team. Costa Rica, 2013. This is serious, y'all. This guy's an awful human being. Had to go. Costa Rica, 2013. Some of the cheerleaders on a trip said they were required to be topless. And though the photographs used for the calendar would not show nudity, they invited people to watch, middle-aged men to watch. Suite holders as well. All men granted up-close access to the photo shoots. One evening at the end of a 14-hour day that including posing and dance practices, the squad's director told 9 of the 36 cheerleaders that their work wasn't done. They had a special assignment for the night. Some of the male sponsors had picked them to be personal escorts at a nightclub. These are kids. These are girls, young ladies. This is that dude who owned this team. Get out of here. Let us have our team back. My God. And by the way, would any of this have happened if the brave men and women, specifically the brave young women who came forward at great personal risk to reveal all of this? They deserve a huge shout out. And then, even with that, might this have happened unless he did the ultimate crime? First, suing his co-owners because he thought they were trying to smear him with financial impropriety allegations. They ultimately sold their minority stake back to him. But then the real thing, trying to fudge revenue-sharing numbers with fellow owners, and that proved to be the ultimate crime in the end. It was too much. That was the one that put it over the top. Cooking the books, having 2 different sets of books to steal money from fellow owners. And in the end, the NFL probably quietly saying to him and his wife, Tanya, you know what, you can sell here for $6 billion or this is going to get really ugly. All the while saying out loud that he's got stuff to smear Roger Goodell and other owners with. The other owners didn't budge. Really? Go ahead. Jim Irsay even said that. You can investigate me till the cows come home. Doesn't change any of this. Forbes ranking the Commanders the 8th most valuable team in sports, ahead of the Lakers and Manchester United. We see that with the price tag. And so, ding dong, the witch is dead. And those of us who grew up on this beloved franchise, one of the great franchises, 3 Super Bowl titles under Joe Jackson Gibbs in the 80s and early 90s, get our team back. We thought it was a life sentence. And so, what of Josh Harris? Well, here's what we know about Josh Harris. He oversaw the process in Philadelphia. Say what you will, but it did net Joel Embiid, one of generational talents in the NBA. And he did hire Daryl Morey later, who was the founder of the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference, an analytics guy. And so and by the way, under Dan Snyder, Washington was the last team that showed up at analytics conferences. So now it's under smarter ownership if this in fact goes through. So we have that hope as well. And Daniel Snyder, when he bought the team, he lived amongst us in the D.C. area. Nobody knew who the hell he was. I will tell you this about Josh Harris. He went to high school with my older brother. His dad was my dentist. His dad was the nicest dude in the world. This is the happiest day of all of our lives. I cannot tell you the number of texts that went back and forth between people. And so who knows how this will turn out. Maybe they'll be like the Sixers and they will not have won a title yet. And they won't themselves. Maybe they will just sort of be mediocre for years and years. None of us know. But the one thing that I do know is that The biggest thing today is that Josh Harris is not Daniel Snyder. And ladies and gentlemen, the long life sentence, the national nightmare for those of us who grew up on this football team. We thought we would die with this guy as our owner. This team is now free to be actually perhaps a contender and a winning football franchise moving forward. That may not seem like a lot to you, but for those of us who grew up in that area of the country, what a day it is. And not even mentioned in any of that, Kelly. The unwillingness to change the team's name until sponsors pulled out, of course, dark cloud over the Washington franchise all those years. Now can we get a name change back to the Washington football team or something else?
Fish taco holders.
And can we get the stadium back in D.C.? All right. Got it out of my system.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.